The Federation. From Earth's ashes to a galactic beacon. In the mid-21st century, the Earth lay shattered in the wake of the Third World War. Societies fractured, nations dissolving into chaos, and the planet's surface became a scarred battleground of fated power. It was during this darkest chapter that the seeds of something monumental took root, a transformation that would reforge humanity's destiny among the stars. As the conflict waned, corporations rose from the wreckage of nation-states. They commanded resources on an unprecedented scale, their influence extending far beyond any singular country. By 2060, the once mighty United States of the Americas had merged with other failing nations, rebranding itself as the Federation of the United States before simply becoming the Federation. A constitution emerged, distilled from previous centuries' ideals and written for a new world order. Governance was lean, efficient, and designed to unify rather than divide. Industrial efforts were swift. By 2080, humans had industrialized the Moon and established a substantial base on Mars. The Federation, still confined to the solar system, relied on these new territories to rebuild and feed the economy while reviving a planet teetering on collapse. These achievements set the stage for humanity's next leap, venturing beyond Sol. The discovery of alien life in the Tau Ceti system ignited the first embers of interstellar ambition. Within 30 years, humanity launched probes and then manned missions. Colonies sprang up in neighboring systems, Delta Pavonis, Altair, Beta Hydri, each populated rapidly but not always with care. Terraforming and ecological conquest became the hallmark of colonial expansion. The planet in Delta Pavonis, for example, housed an early biosphere that was ultimately extinguished by human settlers. In these fledgling worlds, humanity repeated the mistakes of Earth. Ambition outpaced wisdom. Tensions finally erupted. The Sol system dispatched a fleet to Tau Ceti, following the colony's outright defiance of Sol's calls to preserve local life. The ensuing clash was inconclusive, but it forced Sol's hand. In 2242, 5 systems, Sol, Tau Ceti, Delta Pavonis, Altair, and Beta Hydri, signed the Federal Accord. This pact laid down rights, responsibilities, and the protection of xenoculture as central tenets. The Federation had, at long last, become more than a solar entity. It was a fragile interstellar commonwealth. With this foundation, humanity expanded with newfound order. The Federation offered structure in what was previously an unruly scramble for worlds. Although the name Federation of Star Systems was briefly adopted, it soon reverted simply to the Federation, a title powerful enough on its own. Yet unity did not come without costs. In 2310, the colony at Aquinar broke away, its defiance leading to decades of conflict beginning around 2330. A protracted war spanned 5 decades, ultimately concluding in a peace that was more fragile than lasting. Meanwhile, in 2480, the Federation ceded Van Maanen's star to a religious sect, the Guardians of the Free Spirit, making it a permit-locked sanctuary, an exception to the Federation's reach. Between 2500 and 2900, corporate power surged. Mining hubs and resource extraction zones proliferated in far-flung systems. Life in many colonies became a grind beneath the gaze of megacorporations. Prosperity for some, indenture for many. But resistance and innovation also kindled anew. In 2994, a rebellion in Alioth rejected both Federation and Empire, coalescing into the Alliance, a new polity born of defiance and unity among outcasts. The years that followed would see the Federation at its height. By the turn of the 33rd century, it remained the largest power in human-occupied space. Its might rested not only in politics and economy, but in its military. The Federal Navy, with dreadnoughts like the 2-kilometer Farragut-class battlecruisers, stood as a deterrent to rivals and a shield to loyal systems. These vessels embodied the Federation's resolve to maintain order, and if need be, to impose it. By 3300, the core worlds were secure. Systems such as Eta Cassiopeia became the military heart of the Federation, hosting major fleets. Mars remained the seat of governance, home to the Great Federal Congress in Olympus Village. Meanwhile, power flowed through corporate arteries. Sirius Corporation dominated hyperdrive and energy industries, while others like Falcon de Lacy, Laken Spaceways, Core Dynamics, and Sod Kruger built the ships and hardware that powered the human endeavor. The Federation had become a multidimensional behemoth, a capitalist powerhouse, a political union, and a military titan. It spanned dozens of star systems, all under the sheen of stability, though beneath, tensions between corporate interests, moral imperatives, and the ideals of freedom simmered. The Federal Accord, forging unity among the stars. In the 23rd century, humanity's reach had begun to stretch beyond Earth, but it was still a fractured and turbulent effort. Colonists scattered across the solar system and nearby stars, driven by ambition, corporate interests, and the search for new frontiers. By 2159, the Taylor colony in the Tau Ceti system had achieved self-sufficiency and was home to the first thriving extrasolar settlement. As settlers adapted to the alien world, tensions arose between preserving the native ecosystem and ensuring the survival of human life. Between 2161 and 2165, a relentless ecological decline unfolded as imported Earth species overwhelmed the indigenous flora and fauna. Earth authorities intervened, and by 2228, sanctions and condemnations were issued, but unrest had already taken root. By early 2240, the situation reached a boiling point. The Taylor colony, led by colonial administrator John Taylor, declared independence from Earth. Their defiance sparked a showdown. A fleet dispatched from Seoul encountered fierce resistance as colonists moved to thwart the newcomers. Neither side achieved a decisive victory, and clashes persisted until both parties agreed to negotiations. In 2242, they reached the Federal Accord, a bold new compact designed to grant autonomy while preserving unity. Seoul, Tau Ceti, Delta Pavonis, Altair, and Beta Hydri ratified the accord, becoming the founding systems of this nascent interstellar union. The accord drew heavily on the principles laid down by Earth's earlier constitutions, blending personal freedoms, interstellar responsibility, and the preservation of cultural and biological diversity. Rights were enshrined, slavery and uncontrolled ecological exploitation were forbidden, xenoculture and indigenous life forms were to be protected. In return, each member system was tasked with contributing to the new federation's shared prosperity and order. Interestingly, at its inception, this union briefly took the name Federation of Star Systems, though that title proved unwieldy and soon fell out of favor. Federation became the preferred, dignified shorthand, reflecting the unity of its constituents under one banner. Yet beneath the surface, tensions persisted. The accord did not instantly abolish conflict, nor did it erase the scars of colonial trauma. But it did establish a framework, a political and moral infrastructure, within which further disagreements could be mediated rather than fought. Congress, seated on Mars, emerged as the legislative voice of this union. A president, elected by citizens across the founding systems, took on executive responsibilities. The Federal Accord would evolve, adapt, and be amended over centuries, but its foundation was this milestone of 2242. In the years following, other systems began to align with Federation values. The Accord served as a beacon for colonized worlds seeking stability, legal representation, and protection under a broader collective. Colonial expansion continued, but now guided by laws designed to prevent unchecked exploitation. Representatives debated infrastructure, education, resource sharing, and security across light years of distance and diversity of culture. Despite the new interstellar alliance, the Federation's early years were marked by growing pains. Corporate influence remained strong. Mega-entities like Sirius Corporation and Laken Spaceways supplied ships, hyperdrive innovation, and resources. Commercial interests continued to shape policy in legislative halls. Still, the ideals at the Accord's core, democracy, stewardship, and interstellar solidarity, gradually took root. The Federal Navy was established to safeguard member systems and uphold the Accord's Mutual Defense Clause. Though its presence was meant more for deterrence than aggression, the Navy became integral in enforcing Federation laws and safeguarding its citizens. Beta Hydri, for instance, became a strategic military hub, home not only to early colonists but also to shipyards able to construct the 2-kilometer Farragut-class battlecruisers that typified the Federation's evolving naval might. Over time, ceremonial observances marked each anniversary of the Accord's signing. On the 100th anniversary in 2342, Federation leaders gathered on Mars and at sites across member worlds to reflect on how far humanity had come since those fraught diplomatic negotiations. By then, dozens of systems had entered the Union. The ideals articulated in 2242, autonomy balanced with mutual responsibility, the protection of xenolife, democratic representation, had become embedded in Federation identity. By 3300, the founding Accord was still regarded as the Federation's sacred charter. Mars remained the seat of government, with Congress convening in Olympus Village. Other systems like Altair, Beta Hydri, Delta Pavonis, and Tau Ceti were revered as heralds of Federation origins. Their colonization, conflicts, and compromises stood as origin stories, testaments to the choices that shaped humanity's interstellar trajectory. What began as a fragile negotiation between Earth and a single rebellious colony blossomed into the cornerstone of an interstellar society. From confrontation to constitution, from isolated worlds to a networked civilization, the Federal Accord of 2242 remains the moment when humanity chose unity over fragmentation. And with that choice, the Federation was born, its principles carried forward on the wings of exploration, governance, and a collective hope that spans among the stars. Corporate titans and the engine of expansion. By the early 24th century, it had become clear that the machinery of government and the vastness of interstellar space demanded a level of logistical support no single state could provide. Beginning around the mid-2300s, corporations emerged not simply as suppliers and manufacturers, but as the architects of expansion. Their ships, fuel, infrastructure, and ambition would become the threads weaving the Federation into a cohesive and growing order. In 2339, the Sirius Corporation launched the first purely corporate colonization mission, bound for the Sirius system. It was a bold move, and one that transformed the interstellar economy. Having gained early control over fuel production, the corporation swiftly became the primary supplier of hyperdrive fuel and power systems to both major powers. In this role, it adopted a stance of neutrality, profiting from both sides during periods of conflict while maintaining the trust of each. Within a century, its technology had become integral to military and civilian vessels alike, and its corporate governance, known as the Sirius Convention, began to influence independent systems beyond its immediate holdings. Fuel and drives remained its foundation, but by 3278 Sirius had perfected a next-generation hyperdrive. This innovation came just in time to mend the wounds of an earlier failure. The disappearance of its experimental passenger liner, the Antares, during its maiden voyage. The wreckage, discovered only in 3302, confirmed a catastrophic internal failure. Yet the corporation rebounded swiftly, its reputation restored by the success of the new drive program. While Sirius commanded the flow of energy and propulsion, shipbuilding giants transformed transit itself. Ragged colonial fleets and merchant convoys gave way to sleek and reliable liners, cutters, and warships crafted by the likes of Laken Spaceways, Core Dynamics, Falcon de Lacy, and Core Dynamics' rival, Gutamaya. These manufacturers became synonymous with federal expansion and with internal influence. But progress was not without controversy. In late 3306, Laken Spaceways teetered on the brink of collapse under financial strain and investor distrust. The power vacuum invited the intervention of Core Dynamics, whose CEO orchestrated a hostile takeover. Allegations soon surfaced: black market share transfers, coercive boardroom tactics, and a growing corporate faction referred to as the Jupiter Division. Investigations followed, Diplomatic unease grew as military suppliers risked becoming the virtual property of a single corporate entity. In early 3307, the takeover proceeded, but not without scrutiny. By mid-3307, Laken's headquarters were shifted into Alliance territory, and its future was tied to political resolution just as tightly as economic recovery. Corporations like Remlock, however, took a different path. Known for its employee-centric policies and outspoken stance against slavery, Remlock distinguished itself as both industrial pioneer and moral crusader. By 3300, its CEO had publicly clashed with systems that employed slave labor, and the company began directing portions of its profits toward abolitionist causes. Then there were those whose ambitions spread into government itself. Sirius Corporation's spin-off, Sirius Gov, administered entire systems, providing local governance and services where the Federation's presence was thin. This added governmental layer helped stabilize colonies but raised questions. When a corporation controls laws, fuel, drive systems, and local governments, is it a partner or a state? By 3307 and 3308, these questions had become urgent. Sirius's CEO went public, urging scrutiny of their past. Their role in diffusing superpower conflict, resettling refugees, hosting interstellar summits, and advancing exploration. He argued that their neutrality and technological leadership warranted trust. But critics asked if any corporation wielding such influence could ever be fully accountable. These corporate titans shaped more than commerce and ships. They built frontier worlds, brokered peace talks, funded fleets, constructed megaships, and rewrote the mechanics of Federation society. Their factories became colonies. Their custom laws became regional statutes. Without them, many of the Federation's systems would never have joined the polity, and without them, political unity might have dissolved back into fragmentation. Corporate interest remained largely aligned with expansion. Victories meant new customers, new markets, new contracts. But the tension between public good and private gain was never far from a breaking point. Even as the Federation extended its reach across light years, it did so propelled by enterprising corporations that both enabled its growth and tested its cohesion. In them lay both the glory of human ambition and the seeds of its greatest internal challenge. Olympus Village and the centers of power. Few transformations in human history are as intrinsic, symbolic, and practical as the relocation of the Federation's capital from a war-scarred Earth to the terraformed landscapes of Mars. This shift melded political necessity with visionary outreach, ushering in an era defined by interplanetary governance and the consolidation of power, not as abstract dominion, but as a visible living enterprise. The world of Sol, once dominated by Earth, had endured centuries of climate collapse and radiation in the aftermath of World War III. By the late 23rd century, Earth had become a fading relic of humanity's beginnings. Mars, however, had been painstakingly terraformed and made comfortable by 2291, offering a more stable and sustainable environment. In the shadow of the Federation's unforeseen defeat at the Battle of Achener in 2325, Congress and other federal institutions began a deliberate migration to a fresh and purposeful locus of governance. Thus, Olympus Village, located on Mars's Tharsis Highlands, emerged. The move was both pragmatic and symbolic, marking the Federation's shift from Earth-centric roots to an interstellar commonwealth. By 2325, the capital had firmly established itself in Olympus Village. The settlement rapidly became the hub of human power. There, the White House rose, an echo of its namesake in Washington, D.C., serving as the presidential residence as well as a venue for press briefings, diplomatic receptions, and ceremonial occasions. Close by, the Federal Congress building stood, where 500 elected representatives gathered, each committed to attending sessions in person to vote and shape the laws that governed trillions across light years. Security, oversight, and law found their center in the Federal High Court and the offices of the Federal Intelligence Agency, both headquartered within the village. The skyline became a testament to the Federation's institutional architecture. Even the spaceport, bustling with arrivals and departures from all corners of human-occupied space, embodied the dual nature of Olympus Village, where terrestrial affairs met cosmic trajectories. Education and scientific inquiry were also embedded in the heart of governance. Olympus Village University, the Federation's largest academic institution, became a crucible for xenological, political, and technological studies. It served not only as the birthplace of laws and policies, but also as a driver of future strategies, through the training of political analysts, diplomats, scientists, and administrators. Its prestige approached that of its counterparts in rival superpowers, but its proximity to political power made it uniquely influential. Mars carried deeper resonance. Earth's historic capital had become a milestone of heritage and tourism, yet Olympus Village was now the seat of actual authority. Its emergence between the late 2280s and early 2300s encapsulated the Federation's confidence in its own future and signaled humanity's evolving identity. Oliver-styled offices, academic towers, and intelligence headquarters rose in harmonious clusters, reflecting both cooperation and hierarchy. High-speed transit tunnels connected the spaceport, university, government, and corporate centers, creating a dense nexus where ideas, power, and commerce intersected. Olympus Village also housed the headquarters of several of the Federation's leading corporations, including Core Dynamics, among others. Their proximity to lawmakers and diplomats reinforced the blurred lines between commerce and governance, where legislative corridors overlapped with corporate boardrooms, and where every trade agreement passed or defense contract signed felt intimately tied to both public policy and private interest. Over the centuries that followed, each passing president, Congress, and High Court judge walked the same corridors scented by Mars's muted red dust. In the early 3300s, political dramas continued to unfold in that shared environment. In January 3307, for example, former President Jasmina Halsey returned to Olympus Village Spaceport to testify before the Federal High Court, her arrival stirring both nostalgia and controversy. By October 3309, the newly elected President Felicia Winters accepted her victory in a rally held in the village, proclaiming a renewed vision for the Federation's future with Mars as its beating heart. In the centuries since terraforming was complete and the government's relocation, Olympus Village has been more than a capital. It is the physical embodiment of federal unity, the junction where legislation, judicial oversight, intelligence, academia, and corporate ambition converge. It is where Mars transcended its role as a colony to become the seat of human interstellar identity. Olympus Village reminds us that power is not merely enacted, it is built, lived, and propagated. Where once Earth claimed that right, today Mars, through Olympus Village, embodies the Federation's promise, a civilization that has outgrown its cradle to govern across the stars, not from nostalgia, but from a vibrant, adaptive center forged with intention and vision. Representative democracy in an ocean of stars. By the dawn of the 34th century, the Federation had grown into a sprawling interstellar democracy. Its political institutions stretched across thousands of star systems. A defining feature of this civilization was its commitment to representative democracy, a structure carefully engineered to balance voices from distant colonies with the gravitational pull of its core worlds. In Olympus Village on Mars, the heart of government pulsed with elected energy. The Federal Congress, composed of 500 congressmen, convened in person within a grand domed chamber. These men and women were elected for 8-year terms by citizens across the Federation systems, with a mandatory vote of confidence after 4 years. If the president or a congressman failed that vote, a fresh election was immediately triggered. No one could serve consecutive terms, though many congressmen built their careers toward ascending to the presidency afterward. Representation, though universal in principle, was imperfect in practice. Every system had at least one congressional seat, but rapidly expanding outer colonies found their influence diluted. Core systems like Sol commanded multiple representatives, while younger worlds clamored for equity but were stymied by entrenched power structures. Efforts to expand representation were discussed, but weighed down by politics. The president, elected directly by the people, held an 8-year mandate, unique among Federation offices. Citizens voted Federation-wide, and after 4 years, their confidence was reaffirmed or replaced through that vote of no confidence. The rise of Felicia Winters to the presidency exemplified this democratic process. She won the October 3309 election with a modest 4% majority over her rival Jerome Archer, entering an 8-year term that began in earnest on October 31, 3310. Her ascent wasn't just a political event. It signaled a shift in governance priorities, with pledges to curb surveillance and redirect funding toward public welfare. This democratic tapestry extended beyond national elections. The government oversaw a robust network of agencies and courts. The Federal High Court arbiters, the judicial backbone, the Federal Intelligence Agency handling security, the regulatory authorities managing trade and transport, the diplomatic corps representing the Federation abroad, each stemmed from citizens' will, filtered through elected leaders. Local governance had its own rhythms, too. Systems and colonies maintained planetary or district-level government, holding elections for governors, councils, and selected administrators. While still functioning within the Federation's constitutional framework, these local bodies brought governance closer to citizens living many light years from Olympus Village. Throughout its history, this system bore the strain of scale. In 2594, facing a bloated Congress that hindered efficient decision-making, the Federation enacted a reform, slashing the number of congressmen and extending presidential terms to 8 years, an adjustment intended to reduce churn and boost stability. The Federation also featured a political framework reminiscent of a two-party system, the Liberal and Republican parties. The head of the non-governing party automatically became shadow president, poised to assume office should the sitting president lose a vote of confidence. This kept governance responsive and opposition ready. Campaigns unfolded across media feeds, planet-wide debates, rallies in colony capitals, and at Olympus Village itself. Emergencies accentuated the gravitas of representative democracy. When the crisis demanded swift action, Congress wielded emergency legislation, such as the Domestic Counterterrorism Act of 3307, which superseded prior domestic laws in a single vote during a time of unrest. But such measures were always controversial, counterweight by the oversight of citizen-elected legislators. The success of this democracy lay in its adaptability. As new systems joined, they gained representation. As citizens demanded reform, Congress listened, or at least debated. When scandals erupted, shadow presidents and opposition voices capitalized on those moments to reshape public discourse. And when emergencies threatened unity, citizens learned anew the value of choosing their leaders wisely. In the vast ocean of stars, this representative democracy offered structure and agency. It tethered distant worlds to a common civic identity, grounded in elected representation, shared values, and institutional accountability. Humanity's experiment in governance had been extended across light years, and had endured not as a relic, but as a living, evolving practice of democracy. Fewer than 500 individuals stood between the stars and the laws shaping billions, but their impact was immense. In each election, vote, debate, and crisis, the Federation affirmed its origins. People electing people, across systems and generations, charting civilization's course among the stars. The Federal Navy, guardians of civilization. When the Federation was still young and scattered across a handful of star systems, its protection came from informal militias and impromptu fleets mustered from local forces. But in 2702, during the tumultuous Birthright Wars, conflicts stirred by corporate land seizures and rival claims, the urgency to establish a formal, centralized military became undeniable. Thus, the modern Federal Navy was born, a unified branch of naval warfare tasked with defending civilization itself. Its first fleet was commissioned in the Enclave system under strict command and direction, marking the transition from regional militias to a true interstellar defense force. Initially headquartered in Enclave, the Navy oversaw patrols, enforcement, and protection of member systems. But as the Federation grew, so too did its naval ambitions. In the late 2970s, Earth-based Command constructed a purpose-built military hub in the Eta Cassiopea system, completing the transition of its headquarters there by 2983. Gone were the days of makeshift command centers. Eta Cassiopea became the nervous center of naval strategy, logistics, and command. The President of the Federation serves as Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, supported by a Fleet Admiral who chairs the Naval Command and participates in presidential cabinet sessions. In January 3308, Teo Maikori assumed the role of Fleet Admiral, bringing with him a renewed vision during a period of growing external pressures. Even as political drama unfolded, the Federal Navy maintained its mission. For example, Admiral Aidan Tanner, later court-martialed and then pardoned, resigned in January 3309. Disillusioned by political interference and commercial influence hindering his ability to safeguard the Federation, he left active duty to serve as an independent specialist, still collaborating with Admiral Maikori to push anti-Xeno efforts forward. During the same era, with the collapse of the Aegis Defense Initiative on January 18, 3308, the burden of protecting humanity from aggressive alien across the stars fell squarely on the Navy's shoulders. Congress swiftly moved to strengthen the Navy's anti-Xeno capability, and a dedicated strike force was established to confront the escalating alien threat. Rear Admiral Daniel Perry was appointed as the Navy's liaison in joint defense efforts, especially as the Federation rallied alongside other powers to reform Aegis in February 3309. The Navy contributed ships, personnel, and material, reflecting its critical role in unified galactic defense. Design and doctrine were also central to the Navy's efficacy. Built by Core Dynamics, the fleet's backbone included formidable military vessels. The 2-kilometer Farragut-class battlecruisers, Federal corvettes, gunships, dropships, assault ships, and the compact F-63 Condor. These ships allowed the Navy to project power and secure vast star lanes. Today, the Federal Navy is not only a deterrent but a guardian of stability. It patrols federal systems, confronts hostile incursions, be they from rival powers, criminal factions, or the mysterious Thargoids, and deploys in support of allies and friendly systems. Through decades of conflict and negotiation, it has become a symbol of the Federation's commitment to order, security, and mutual protection. In December 3308, Shadow President Felicia Winters publicly challenged the Navy's focus, urging it to extend its protection not only to Federation systems, but also to vulnerable independent systems facing Thargoid attacks. She argued that every human system was a potential target, asserting that turning away from neighbors and partners would only hasten the spread of the threat inward. Thus, through centuries and conflicts, the Federal Navy has endured and evolved. From its origins in the Birthright Wars, through the relocation of its headquarters, through leadership changes and political friction, to its current role defending civilization against existential threats, it has become a pillar of unity. It stands watch over the stars as guardians of humanity's reach, and its safety. Ethics and enforcement, the Federation's ideals tested. From its inception in 2242 via the Federal Accord, the Federation enshrined rights that included the prohibition of slavery and the preservation of alien cultures. Over time, those principles became foundational. By the early 3300s, with nearly 2 trillion citizens across more than 3,000 systems, the challenge of maintaining ethical coherence across so vast a domain intensified. In theory, the ban on slavery was absolute. Yet whispers and accusations persisted that certain Federation-controlled space stations still traded in human cargo, raising questions about complicity, oversight failures, or simply the gaps that emerge when minions of commerce stretch beyond the reach of laws. Corporate influence surfaced again as a complicating factor. Federation society was, in many respects, a corporatocracy. Corporate interests funded campaigns, lobbied lawmaking, and sponsored key candidates. That synergy occasionally spilled over into legal gray areas, with regulations shaping policy more than voters' demands, and with regulators sometimes acting as de facto corporate compliance officers rather than independent guardians of public interest. In 3301, under President Jasmina Halsey's administration, tensions between civil rights and enforcement ignited in a fateful case. Halsey ordered the arrest of farm collectives on Kappa Fornacis for growing genetically prohibited crops, onion head, a seemingly innocuous narcotic. Rather than detaining them, she authorized a military strike after a blockade proved ineffective. The resulting attack destroyed civilian infrastructure and killed hundreds of farmers. It put the question to blunt terms: should the Federation prioritize order and prohibition, or protect the rights and lives of its citizens, even when they break unpopular statutes? That same administration stumbled days later when a refugee convoy was attacked during the conflict in Luff, allegedly carrying rebel supporters. Thousands died, and while wartime confusion cast doubts, many saw the Federation's hand in targeting noncombatants, and the veneer of moral high ground cracked. With the rise of Felicia Winters in 3310, the Federation moved toward a posture of restraint, but challenges continued. That year, a growing cult worshipping a Thargoid deity, the Far God, emerged in fringe systems. Initially dismissed, the group's xenophile messages alarmed security services. By late 3308, the Federal Security Service's response grew heavy-handed: arrests, forced closures of religious outposts, and criminalization of the group. Civil rights advocates, led by Shadow President Jerome Archer and other opposition voices, denounced the crackdown as a violation of religious freedoms and an overreach of surveillance powers. Meanwhile, the Federal Intelligence Agency quietly expanded its reach. In 3307, a new bureau began monitoring communications under the pretext of counterterrorism, searching for threats before they materialized. While the instrument aimed to thwart potential conspiracies and alien infiltration, citizens questioned the balance between safety and privacy. The Federation's ideals, empowering citizens, felt inverted when citizens felt watched. Further complicating matters, corporate governments gained sway in remote systems where Federation institutions held little sway. Entities like SiriusGov administered entire worlds, providing stability and infrastructure, but also issuing laws. Officially under Federation purview, these systems often blurred the line between public good and corporate mandate. When profits dictated policy, ethics slipped behind pragmatism. Even Federation identity was caught in a moral paradox. The emphasis on opposing slavery and preserving xenoculture stood in contrast with a harsher reality. Poverty persisted, social inequality ran deep, and economic mobility varied wildly. Citizens paid lip service to rights, yet lived in worlds where wealth and influence remained concentrated. The Thargoid threat of the early 3300s sharpened these ethical tensions. As attacks escalated, the Federal Navy became aggressive, striking alien vessels and colonies believed to harbor aggressors. The justification, xenoprotection, echoed the ideals of the Accord. Yet the line between defense and offense blurred. When entire worlds were evacuated or destroyed based on suspected ties, some Federation worlds blamed overreach. Others saw it as tragic necessity. The Federation had forged a principle from fear and demanded that enforcement reflect it carefully, yet often didn't. By 3311, the Federation was no longer a mere idea. It was a sprawling system of law enforcement, intelligence, military might, corporate power, and democratic symbols. Its ideals remained enshrined, but its actions revealed the tensions inherent to governing across billions of lives. When enforcement bends the ideals it is meant to uphold, the system's legitimacy frays, even as its institutions press forward. In the border systems and the core alike, citizens grapple with what Federation values truly mean, not just on parchment, but in everyday life where survival, order, ambition, and conscience often collide. And so the Federation remains engaged not only in defending itself against external threats, but in defending its own ideals against the erosion that unchecked enforcement, commerce, and fear can bring. united front against the unknown. By the early 3300s, humanity's frontier had become haunted by a threat unlike any before: the Thargoids. Their sudden and relentless incursions struck isolated systems and core worlds alike, leaving a turbulent wake of shattered stations, vanished supply lines, and terror. With three major powers, the Federation, the Empire, and the Alliance, unwilling to face this menace alone, a radical response formed the backbone of what came next. In August 3303, delegates from all three superpowers gathered in the Sirius system for the Galactic Summit. The crisis they faced transcended political rivalries, and in a rare display of unity, they signed the Aegis Accord, creating Aegis, a joint interstellar agency to coordinate research, defense, and diplomatic efforts against the growing alien threat. This coalition represented humanity's genuine hope: pooled resources, shared intelligence, and cross-border tactics focused on survival. With Aegis formally established, research initiatives moved fast. By late 3303, Guardian artifacts were pressed into service, yielding new hope for weapon systems. Gauss cannons augmented with anti-Xeno capabilities emerged more slowly than hoped, but represented a promising breakthrough. Meanwhile, Aegis also began deploying megaships, mobile research hubs that traveled to places like Delphi, collecting invaluable data and coordinating frontline defenses. But such high-stakes activity invited retaliation. On December 12, 3303, Aegis laboratories, including the Oracle and the Pleiades, were attacked by Thargoids using devastating shutdown fields, crippling core systems, and inflicting heavy civilian casualties. Stations collapsed in catastrophic fashion, and rescue efforts by independent pilots became urgent. In response, Aegis ramped up both research and military coordination. The first Joint Strike Squadrons were deployed. Independent pilots were rewarded for anti-Xeno participation, and all three powers attempted unified strategy. Yet cracks began to form. By early 3307, under public pressure and doubts about its effectiveness, Aegis faced increasing scrutiny. The megaship Alexandria vanished during a mission presumed hijacked or lost to Thargoid intervention, a symbolic blow to the coalition's credibility. Despite setbacks, the threat demanded action. On January 18, 3308, following recommendations of an internal review, the three powers agreed to dissolve Aegis as a central command. Its responsibilities, both research and defense, were distributed back to individual militaries. The Federal Navy, the Imperial Navy, the Alliance Defense Force, and the Sirius Corporation's own strike fleets. Research efforts continued, but under new, more constrained institutions such as Olympus Village University, Imperial Science Academy, and Holloway Bioscience. Though Aegis went silent as a unified face of resistance, its legacy endured. It proved that when confrontation transcends identity or politics, cooperation is possible. The emergency response blueprint, alliances, shared research, rapid deployment, never disappeared, it simply evolved. In the uncharted void between star systems and shadowed corridors of government, humanity found new ways to collaborate. Federation convoys defended border colonies, Imperial fleets escorted refugees, and Alliance technicians rebuilt stations while sharing anti-Xeno blueprints. Autonomous platforms held siege lines while scientists studied Thargoid biology in secret. Independent pilots flew into darkness, their squadrons the last line, and sometimes the best line of defense.